What would you do if a wild bobcat showed up at your doorstep, carrying a wounded owl in its jaws? No, this isn't the beginning of a fairy tale. Deep in the pines, something happened that even seasoned wildlife experts couldn't explain. A predator brought home another predator, but not for a meal. What followed next shocked everyone. Was it survival instinct, compassion, or something even deeper? Stay with us, because this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about wild animals. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy this story, please like and follow. It really motivates us to keep creating. Your feedback is always welcome, and it helps us make our stories even better. Thank you. The storm rolled in fast over the treetops of Yukon, smearing the twilight sky with shades of charcoal and slate. Wind whipped through the tall firs and birches, making the windows of the old cabin rattle in protest. Rain pelted the roof like 1,000 hurried footsteps, and for a while, Marina Clark welcomed the noise. It distracted her from the deeper, quieter ache inside. She had only lived here for 3 weeks, though it felt longer. The days blurred together in solitude and silence, broken only by the occasional email from her editor or a reminder from the grocery delivery app. After her father's death and a divorce finalized within the same month, Marina had retreated from Toronto, abandoning the city's crowded cafes and late-night deadlines. This cabin, inherited from an aunt she barely remembered, sat on the edge of a forest that promised quiet. And so far, it had kept its promise, until tonight. The sound came between the gusts, faint, almost like a bird, or maybe a child. Marina froze, spoon halfway to her lips, then lowered her bowl of soup. She tilted her head toward the window. There it was again, a soft, desperate cry from the backyard. Not the wind, not a branch creaking. Something else. Something alive. Her heart quickened, and without really thinking, she grabbed her raincoat from the hook, slipped on her boots, and took the flashlight from the drawer. The beam of light wavered slightly in her hand as she stepped out into the wet darkness. The garden, mostly weeds and rocks now, shimmered under the rain. Her breath formed clouds in the air. She moved slowly, sweeping the flashlight left to right. Then the beam caught something, movement beneath the old oak at the garden's edge. A shape crouched low beneath a pile of fallen leaves. Marina stepped closer, her boots squelching in the mud. There, soaked to the bone, was a bobcat. Its striped brown fur plastered against its body, ears flattened by the wind. The animal had a visible gash on its back leg and was curled protectively around something much smaller. Marina raised the light slightly and gasped. It was a baby owl, feathers clumped and dripping, shivering beneath the shelter of the bobcat's body. Predator and prey, together? The bobcat looked up at her, eyes glowing amber in the light. There was no growl, no snarl, just something she didn't expect. A look that flickered between fear and hope. It was not an animal guarding food. It was one protecting something fragile. Marina took a step back, breath caught in her throat. Every instinct told her to return to the house and call a wildlife service. But her feet stayed planted. She recognized something in those eyes, a quiet desperation, the kind that mirrored her own every time she looked in the mirror. A minute passed, maybe more. Then she turned on her heel and hurried inside. From the storage closet, she grabbed a large plastic bin, lined it with an old fleece blanket, and returned to the oak tree. The rain hadn't eased. Lightning flashed behind the mountains. She placed the bin gently on the ground a few feet away and stepped back, kneeling into the mud. The bobcat studied her, then nudged the owl gently with its nose. To Marina's astonishment, the bobcat rose on 3 legs, limped forward, and pushed the baby owl into the bin with her snout, then climbed in herself. Her heart stuttered. Without a word, Marina lifted the container, the weight of it surprising but not overwhelming. Inside, 2 trembling creatures looked up at her, as if surrendering to whatever came next. She carried them to the small tool shed beside the cabin, kicked the door open, and set the container down near the unused iron stove. She lit a fire with trembling fingers, then rushed inside to grab a bowl of water, raw chicken scraps, and minced beef. She placed everything gently around them and stepped back. The bobcat didn't move. The owl blinked. The fire crackled and warmed the shed's air. For the first time in what felt like years, Marina felt something stir in her chest, something alive. She sat in the corner, damp and tired, watching them. Later that night, she opened her laptop and typed, "Can a bobcat and an owl become friends?" She didn't find a satisfying answer. But she knew this much. Something extraordinary had just begun. The morning broke cold and gray, with snowflakes swirling like ash in the dim Yukon light. Marina wrapped herself in her thick wool sweater and stood for a long moment in front of the shed door, hand on the handle, heart beating fast. She wasn't sure what she would find. Slowly, she opened the door. Inside, the fire had died down, but warmth still lingered in the air. The plastic bin lay undisturbed. Nira was awake, her golden eyes fixed on Marina but calm. She didn't flinch. The baby owl, Theo, still nestled into the blanket, eyes half shut, body trembling slightly but not from fear. A bowl of water sat half empty. A few strips of raw chicken were gone. Marina exhaled slowly. They had eaten. They had made it through the night. She stepped inside, quietly closing the door behind her. The old stove still radiated heat. She added a few more logs and sat down against the opposite wall, pulling her knees to her chest. She said nothing, just watched. Hours passed like this. Marina worked on her laptop from a corner of the shed, answering emails she'd ignored for weeks. Occasionally, she glanced up to see Naira watching her, tail curled around Theo protectively. They didn't trust her yet, but they hadn't rejected her either. That afternoon, Marina made a list. Supplies to buy if I'm doing this for real. The top of the list read, in slightly shaky handwriting, meat, gloves, owl vitamins, nerve. She spent the next days building a rhythm. Wake up early, clean and refill water bowls. Prepare minced meat mixed with powdered vitamins for Theo. Clean Naira's wound with warm salt water. Cut aloe from the plant on her windowsill and gently apply it to the bobcat's hind leg. Theo didn't eat much the first few days. His wing was slightly tilted, possibly sprained. He couldn't fly, barely hopped. Marina read everything she could find online about juvenile owls. Their diets, behaviors, common injuries. She even emailed a biologist at a wildlife rehab center anonymously, posing her questions as hypothetical. At night, she sat in the shed, wrapped in her sleeping bag, reading aloud from old books. Not for them, but for herself. Still, the rhythm of her voice seemed to calm Theo. Naira never took her eyes off Marina, but no longer growled or tensed when she approached. One morning, about 10 days after the storm, something shifted. Marina opened the shed door, a small bowl of warmed chicken in hand. She knelt, offering it slowly. Naira sat across the space, her ears twitching. For a long moment, the bobcat didn't move. Then, quietly, Naira stood. She walked forward, not quickly, not cautiously, just purposefully. She stopped in front of Marina's hand and, with silent grace, took a strip of meat between her teeth. Marina didn't breathe. She didn't even blink. When Naira backed away and settled beside Theo again, Marina let the tears fall freely. It wasn't just about trust. It was about purpose. In caring for these two wild creatures, something in her had begun to realign. For the first time since her father's funeral, since her husband packed his things and left, Marina woke with direction. Feed Naira. Check Theo's wing. Warm the shed. Write it all down. Her journal, once a space for unfinished paragraphs and half-hearted ideas, was now filled with careful entries like, Day 11. Naira licked Theo's head. She won't eat beef, only chicken. Theo flapped twice today. Theo was healing. He still couldn't fly, but each day his movements grew stronger. He jumped from crate to ledge, flapped vigorously, and even made a soft, curious clicking sound whenever Marina walked in. At night, when Marina couldn't sleep, she would sit in the shed, head resting against the wall, listening to the quiet. Sometimes Theo would climb onto the back of an overturned bucket and stare at the stars through a narrow crack in the wood. Naira would curl beside him like a living guardian statue. It didn't make sense biologically. A bobcat nurturing an owl? A writer caring for them both? And yet, it was real. One evening, Marina cooked soup for herself again. The first real meal she'd made in over a month. She placed it on the counter, then smiled as she realized she'd made enough for 3. Habit now. Later that night, she opened a blank document on her laptop and titled it, The Wild Ones, A Journal of Healing. Her first line was simple. Today the bobcat took food from my hand. The owl didn't blink when I entered the room, and for the first time in months, I remembered who I am. Outside, snow blanketed the trees, but inside the shed, 3 hearts beat quietly in unison. Winter in Yukon didn't creep in. It conquered. By late November, Marina's garden was buried under a thick quilt of snow. The path between the house and the tool shed became a narrow tunnel she carved each morning with a shovel. She'd begun calling it the corridor between worlds. Inside the shed, warmth pulsed steadily from the iron stove. Marina had converted the space into a true sanctuary. Lined crates for Theo to practice hopping, a cushioned corner where Naira liked to rest, and shelves filled with supplies that once would have seemed absurd for a woman who used to live off takeout and coffee shop pastries. One evening, as Marina sipped peppermint tea inside the shed, a sound broke the quiet. It was sharp, like a bark, but higher. She looked up and Theo was already alert, his wide eyes trained toward the roof. Naira rose too, hackles raised not in fear, but attention. Then, from the narrow window high on the wall, a shadow flitted past. Something had landed on the roof. Theo let out a series of soft chirps, a sound Marina had never heard from him before. She stepped outside cautiously, flashlight in hand. Snow crunched beneath her boots. She aimed the light toward the edge of the shed's slanted roof, and there, perched like a sentinel, was another owl. Larger than Theo, with darker feathers and eyes that glowed silver in the beam of the light. The new owl didn't move, just tilted its head slightly. Then, with a whoosh of wings, it lifted off and disappeared into the trees. Marina's breath clouded the air as she turned slowly back towards the door. Inside, Theo hadn't moved from his perch. He stared at the window, chest puffed slightly, as if emboldened. Naira sat beside him, unusually calm. The next evening, the owl returned. This time, it didn't stay on the roof. It landed on a nearby branch, close enough for Theo to see clearly. Again, the strange chirps. Again, no fear, just fascination. Marina didn't try to interfere. She simply watched, Over the next week, the pattern repeated. The owl, whom Marina now mentally named Elliot, visited like clockwork at dusk. And each time, Theo grew more active, flapping his wings with more confidence, his jumps longer, his landings smoother. Marina felt the shift, like watching a child prepare to leave the nest. Then, one night, everything changed. Theo didn't return to the corner where he usually slept. Instead, he stayed perched near the window long after Elliot disappeared. His eyes stayed trained on the dark line of trees. When Marina entered, he barely glanced at her. Naira paced the floor slowly, tail low, ears tilted back. That morning, Theo was gone. Marina found herself rushing into the trees, calling his name as if he might answer. She searched for an hour, boots crunching through snow, eyes darting between branches. Finally, she saw them, two shapes, side by side on a high pine branch, Theo and Elliot. He wasn't lost. He had chosen to follow. Marina returned to the shed slowly. Her heart ached with something she couldn't name. She knew this was what healing looked like. Independence, freedom. But knowing didn't make it easier. That night, Theo didn't return. Marina tried to focus on her work, but the silence in the shed was louder than she expected. Naira was quiet too, staring at the corner where Theo used to sleep. Then, sometime after midnight, Marina heard it. A soft flutter. She rushed to the window. Theo sat on the edge of the tool shed roof, looking down at her. Moments later, he dropped down to the snow, flapped once, and entered through the partially open door. He returned. Naira approached him slowly, sniffed him, then curled beside him like nothing had changed. Marina sat down on the floor and cried. He would leave again, maybe for good someday. But tonight, he had come back. And that meant something. From that night on, a new rhythm emerged. Theo would leave at dusk, sometimes with Elliot, and return at dawn or just after. His feathers gleamed now, and his flight was graceful. Naira had also changed. Her wound had healed completely. Her coat was thick and clean, her movements powerful and precise. She often ventured outside into the garden, sometimes disappearing into the pines for an hour or two before returning. And Marina was learning to let go. She had begun emailing Dr. Callum Reed, a local wildlife expert she'd read about in an article. She wasn't sure why, perhaps to prepare for what came next. But for now, her strange family of three, one woman, one bobcat, one part-time owl, was still intact. By the time midwinter wrapped its arms around Yukon, Marina had fully surrendered to the rhythm of the wild. Her days began early, lighting the fire in the tool shed, checking for Theo's return, scanning the tree line for any sign of Naira. There were still moments of silence, too deep, too cold, but Marina no longer feared them. They were just part of the season. Theo returned most mornings now, sometimes alone, sometimes with Elliot, who had grown bold enough to perch near the house. Naira came and went as she pleased, though she never stayed out past dusk. Her territory had expanded, but her loyalty had not wavered. Then, in late January, the storm hit. It began with a sudden drop in air pressure, a stillness so absolute it set Marina on edge. The local radio, still her lifeline to the world, warned of record winds and whiteout conditions. Marina gathered extra wood, refilled water jugs, and lined the tool shed with thermal blankets. Theo hadn't returned that evening. By midnight, snow was falling sideways, carried by screaming gusts. The windows trembled. The garden disappeared beneath a white blur. Marina sat by the window, hands wrapped around a mug of cooling tea, eyes flicking to the sky. Still no sign of the owls. In the shed, Naira paced back and forth, tail twitching. She let out a low, keening sound that Marina had never heard before, half growl, half call. It echoed in the storm, carried by wind and worry. When Theo still hadn't come by dawn, Marina knew something was wrong. She paced the house like Naira paced the shed, torn between reason and instinct. The storm hadn't lifted, and visibility outside was nearly zero. But Marina couldn't sit still. She bundled herself in every layer she could find. 2 coats, thick boots, scarf, gloves, and stood at the door. Naira was already there. The Bobcat looked up at her, ears back, eyes bright. She took one step toward the snow and then another, waiting. "You're coming with me?" Marina whispered. Naira blinked once, then turned. They stepped into the white together. Snow whipped at Marina's face, biting and relentless. She followed Naira, who moved low and deliberate, her nose close to the ground. The forest was ghostly, trees reduced to gray outlines, branches heavy with snow. Marina could barely see 2 feet ahead. For nearly an hour they trudged, Marina's legs burning, breath ragged. Then Naira stopped. Ahead, beneath a split oak, lay a fallen branch, thick and twisted by the wind, and under it, 2 motionless shapes. Marina rushed forward. It was Theo and Elliot. The branch had pinned their wings. They were alive but shivering violently, eyes closed against the cold. Marina dropped to her knees. She lifted the branch with all her strength, hands burning with the cold. Naira stood beside the owls, nudging them gently with her nose. Theo stirred first, blinking slowly. He let out a weak chirp. Elliot followed, though his wing hung awkwardly. "Come on," Marina urged. Theo flapped once, unsteadily, and landed on her shoulder. Elliot remained on the ground. Marina gently scooped him into the inside of her coat. His body was warmer than she feared, but he didn't resist. They turned back. The return was slower. Marina's limbs felt like stone, her boots filled with snow. Naira stayed close, circling them like a silent guardian. At last, the cabin came into view, soft yellow light glowing like a lighthouse through the storm. Marina collapsed just inside the door, sliding down to the floor. Theo perched on the table, his eyes half-lidded. Elliot stirred in her coat, weak but alive. Naira walked a slow circle around them all, then settled beside the hearth. The storm continued into the night, but it no longer mattered. They were home. All of them. Over the next days, Marina did not sleep much. She rotated warm compresses on Elliot's wing. She hand-fed Theo small strips of liver. She made soup and, for the first time, accepted help. Emailing Dr. Callum Reed, asking for advice, no longer anonymous. Dr. Reed surprised her by replying personally and kindly. A week later, he visited the cabin. He was soft-spoken, with snow-white hair and a voice that sounded like falling snow. Quiet but firm. He spent hours with Naira and the owls, observing silently, then said, "I've never seen anything like this, and I've seen a lot." He didn't ask Marina to give them up. Instead, he helped her file for special care permits. He brought blueprints for a better shelter, dietary plans, and contacts at the Wildlife Center. "You're already doing most of this," he said. "Let's just make it legal." Marina felt her shoulders drop for the first time in months. That night, as she sat with Naira by the fire and watched Theo and Elliot sleep side by side, she realized what the storm had taught her. Healing is not always gentle. Sometimes it requires a fight through wind and ice and fear. But at the end of it, if you're lucky, someone is waiting. Or maybe you're waiting for yourself. Spring in Yukon arrived like a whispered apology. Soft rains, melting ice, and the hesitant return of birdsong. Where snow once dominated, wildflowers now peeked through the soil. The forest that had once stood like a wall of silence now swayed gently, alive again. Marina stood on her porch with a cup of tea, watching Theo soar above the treetops. Elliot wasn't far behind, circling wider but always in sight. Their flight was no longer uncertain. It was confident, graceful, wild. Beside the porch, Naira lay under the blossoming plum tree, her body stretched out, eyes closed, tail flicking lazily. The scar on her leg was barely visible now, hidden beneath thick, healthy fur. But she didn't rest alone. At her belly, nestled safely, was a bobcat cub. Small, striped, with one oversized ear that hadn't quite caught up to the rest of him. Marina had first seen him a week ago when Naira appeared at the forest edge, her movements more careful than usual. She had approached slowly, then stepped aside, revealing the cub. Marina hadn't moved. She'd simply sat down on the grass, letting the moment arrive on its own terms. It was trust, wordless and complete. From the pine branches above, Theo hooted once and dove, landing near the cabin's upper window. Elliot followed, keeping a respectful distance. The owls had built a nest nearby now, close enough to visit daily, far enough to remain free. Marina smiled to herself. Her home was no longer just a shelter. It was chosen. Not by blood, not by tradition, but by shared moments, mutual healing, and the invisible threads of connection. Inside the cabin, her desk had changed too. No longer stacked with half-finished manuscripts or unpaid bills. Instead, a tidy pile of typed pages sat clipped together, the title in bold, Autumn Sanctuary, How the Wild Found Me. Encouraged by Dr. Callum Reed, Marina had written everything. Not just the storm, the owl, the bobcat, the healing, but also the loneliness, the guilt. The night she nearly drove away and didn't. The first time Naira ate from her hand. The day Theo flew and didn't return, then did. She hadn't planned to publish it. It felt too personal. But Dr. Reed, after reading the manuscript, simply said, "If it helped you, it will help someone else." The book went to print in the summer, quietly and without fanfare. But something unexpected happened. Readers responded, not because of the wild animals, though that helped, but because they too had felt broken, lost, alone. And they saw in Marina's quiet, imperfect journey a path back to themselves. Donations began pouring into the local wildlife center. People wrote letters. Some came to visit the cabin's edge, never stepping too close, just leaving small gifts near the tree line. Hand-knitted owl toys, drawings from the children, notes tied in string. With the book's earnings, Marina expanded the garden. She worked with the conservation center to build a semi-wild refuge, fenced but open, safe but untamed. There was a shallow pond, a brush-covered den, climbing posts and high perches. The gate bore a hand-carved sign, for those who stay and those who go. 2 years passed. One morning Marina awoke to find Naira and her cub gone. No warning, no farewell. Just a few paw prints in the soft mud, heading into the trees. She sat on the porch for a long time that day, waiting. They didn't come back. But that night, under a sky scattered with stars, Theo returned, alone this time. He landed on the windowsill, tilted his head, and let out a low, familiar hoot. Marina smiled, tears rising but not falling. He had left. And yet, he returned. In the days that followed, she didn't stop hoping. But she also didn't grieve. She had learned that love is not about holding tight. It's about being willing to let go, and believing that connection, once real, never fully disappears. Sometimes Naira didn't need to return for Marina to feel her presence. Sometimes, all it took was the rustle of a bush or a patch of flattened grass near the plum tree. The garden remained, so did the story. Marina still wrote, still walked the forest paths, still lit the fire in the shed, though it was now more shrine than shelter. Theo and Elliot still visited, and sometimes, when the wind blew just right, Marina could almost hear a soft purring in the trees. From the branch above, Theo would call once, a reminder that healing had come, that family had been found, and that some sanctuaries, especially the quiet, unexpected ones, stay in our hearts forever.
If you find this story truly captivating, please support us with a like and a follow. Every like and follow from you is a great motivation for us to continue creating more stories. And if you have any feedback, don't hesitate to leave it in the comments below. We are always ready to listen and improve to make our future stories even better. Thank you sincerely.